Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This file is being recorded for the January 2022 edition of Socialism for All, and it's an audiobook and discussion of some questions concerning methods of leadership from 1943 by Mao. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe, and consider supporting on Patreon at patreon.com/socialismforall. There's a link to Patreon in the video description. So this particular file is hosted at marx2mao.com, the number 2, MAO.com, and it was taken from the selected works of Mao Zedong, Foreign Languages Press, Peking, 1967, first edition, 1965, second printing, 1967, volume 3, and it was prepared for the internet by David J. Romagnolo, June 1997. In this text are some key descriptions of the technique of developing the mass line, a famous technique that is associated with Mao. There's a footnote off of the title. This decision on methods of leadership was written by Comrade Mao Zedong for the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China. So let's get into the text. 1. There are two methods which we communists must employ in whatever work we do. One is to combine the general with the particular. The other is to combine the leadership with the masses. 2. In any task, if no general and widespread call is issued, the broad masses cannot be mobilized for action. But if persons in leading positions confine themselves to a general call, if they do not personally, in some of the organizations, go deeply and concretely into the work called for, make a breakthrough at some single point, gain experience and use this experience for guiding other units, then they will have no way of testing the correctness or of enriching the content of their general call, and there is the danger that nothing may come of it. In the rectification movement of 1942, for example, there were achievements wherever the method of combining the general call with particular and specific guidance was used. But there were no achievements wherever this method was not used. In the rectification movement of 1943, each bureau and sub-bureau of the Central Committee, and each area and prefectural party committee, in addition to making a general call, a rectification plan for the whole year, must do the following things, gaining experience in the process. Select 2 or 3 units, but not too many, from the organization itself, and from other organizations, schools, or army units in the vicinity. Make a thorough study of those units, acquire a detailed knowledge of the development of the rectification movement in them, and a detailed knowledge of the political history, the ideological characteristics, the zeal in study, and the strong and weak points in the work of some, again not too many, representative members of their personnel. Furthermore, give personal guidance to those in charge to find concrete solutions for the practical problems facing those units. The leaders in every organization, school, or army unit must do likewise, as each of these has a number of subordinate units. Moreover, this is the method by which the leaders combine leading and learning. No one in a leading position is competent to give general guidance to all the units unless they derive concrete experience from particular individuals and events in particular subordinate units. This method must be promoted everywhere so that leading cadres at all levels learn to apply it. So that's the end of point 2. I just want to make a couple of footnotes of my own. First, overall historical context. Where was the world and where was China in 1942 and 1943? Obviously, World War II was going on between the imperialist powers, and that included Japan, which had invaded China. From 1937 to 1945 was the Second Sino, that means Chinese-Japanese War, the first Sino-Japanese War having been in the 1890s. So, okay, in the early 1940s, here's China fighting Japan, but what's going on within China? So, earlier, about 3 decades earlier, 1911, the Qing dynasty, the last monarchy in China, collapsed. In its place, there was kind of a power vacuum because China is geographically fairly large, and it was also very undeveloped at the time. So different regions of China were not necessarily, well connected in terms of communication and transportation. So we know that according to Marxist theory of the history of the development of society, the mode of production that typically follows feudalism, the monarchy, is capitalism. That is, in other words, the next highest stage of development of class society. And so we do see, in fact, a bourgeois party, the nationalists or the Kuomintang, rise up and try to fill some of that power vacuum. At the same time, there is also a socialist movement starting to develop, and the Communist Party of China was founded around this time in 1921. So in these early years after the collapse of the Qing dynasty, the communists and the nationalists actually worked together at first, particularly in the north, to try to restore some order where things had slid backwards and warlords had taken over. And this collaboration was successful at first, but then the nationalists, fairly predictably in my opinion, turned on the communists and they started fighting with each other. Then, in 1937, World War II, Japanese fascists invade, and then there is this renewed threat. So the Communist Party was pretty well established in the north and particularly the northwest, while the Japanese were invading from the northeast. Suffice to say that there was a ton of conflict in China at this time, and the Communist Party was in the thick of it, fighting for people's liberation. They established camps and bases, they set up cooperatives and collectives to provide for the material needs both of the armed forces and the communities that were supporting and collaborating with them. So when Mao is talking about different cadres and units having to gain this experience, it was really vital. It was life or death. They needed the support of the people. They needed to win the trust of the people. They needed to do that by providing leadership, experienced, knowledgeable, thoughtful leadership that would actually result in success, otherwise, again, literally death. So there's some of the context. Now, the other point is, what is a rectification movement? So around this time in the early 1940s, as the Communist Party of China was growing and setting its sights on the revolution that eventually would occur in 1949, they sought to deepen the ideological steeping of the movement in Marxism-Leninism and Mao Zedong thought, rather than sort of a more general progressive reformism. So about 20 years prior to that, there was the May 4th movement. This is basically the time when the Communist Party was founded in China. So overall, the May 4th movement was a progressive, reformist, anti-conservative, anti-traditionalist movement. It, in some ways, grew out of the reforms of the late Qing dynasty as it was collapsing. It was trying to make some reforms, but obviously couldn't keep up and just fell behind into history. But anyway, you had this May 4th movement, which was seeking to bring China in a more progressive direction. And although the Communist Party was founded at that time and came out of that movement, the overall movement was not specifically Marxist. However, at this time, the Communist Party had been fighting for 20 years for the cause, was really taking the leadership in terms of that fight, and they sought at that point to say, hey, this is going to be the ideology going forward. Some critics say of this shift that it's the time when Mao sort of entrenched like a cult of personality. That's at least the criticism. As during this time, when forcefully asserting Marxism-Leninism and Mao Zedong thought, other ideologies were forcibly pushed out of the way. So this reckoning is basically when Marxism was asserted as the way going forward, and, not everybody was happy about it. It is the direction that the movement went in, and of course, the revolution ended up being successful. So, that's what we're talking about. Let's go on to point 3. Experience in the 1942 rectification movement also proves it is essential for the success of the rectification that a leading group should be formed in each unit in the course of the movement, made up of a small number of activists and with the heads of the given unit as its nucleus, and that this leading group should link itself closely with the masses who are taking part in the movement. However active the leading group may be, its activity will amount to fruitless effort by a handful of people, unless combined with the activity of the masses. On the other hand, if the masses alone are active without a strong leading group to organize their activity properly, such activity cannot be sustained for long, or carried forward in the right direction, or raised to a high level. The masses in any given place are generally composed of three parts: the relatively active, the intermediate, and the relatively backward. The leaders must therefore be skilled in uniting the small number of active elements around the leadership, and must rely on them to raise the level of the intermediate elements and to win over the backward elements. A leading group that is genuinely united and linked with the masses can be formed only gradually in the process of mass struggle and not in isolation from it. In the process of a great struggle, the composition of the leading group in most cases should not and cannot remain entirely unchanged throughout the initial, middle, and final stages. The activists who come forward in the course of the struggle must constantly be promoted to replace those original members of the leading group who are inferior by comparison or who have degenerated. One fundamental reason why the work in many places and many organizations cannot be pushed ahead is the lack of a leading group which is united, linked with the masses, and kept constantly healthy. Comment, and by healthy here, it's like refreshing it with the most talented people. That talent being proved in the course of the mass struggle. Continuing, a school of 100 people certainly cannot be run well if it does not have a leading group of several people, or a dozen or more, which is formed in accordance with the actual circumstances, and not thrown together artificially, and is composed of the most active, upright, and alert of the teachers, the other staff, and the students. In every organization, school, army unit, factory or village, whether large or small, we should give effect to the 9th of Stalin's 12 conditions for the Bolshevization of the party, namely, that on the establishment of a nucleus of leadership. There's a footnote there that's referring to Stalin's The Prospects of the Communist Party of Germany and the Question of Bolshevization from 1927. The criteria for such a leading group should be the four which Dimitrov enumerated in his discussion of cadres policy: absolute devotion to the cause, contact with the masses, ability independently to find one's bearings, and observance of discipline. Footnote there, this is from Unity of the Working Class Against Fascism. Whether in carrying out the central tasks, war, production, education, including rectification or ideological correction, or in checking up on work, examining the cadres' histories, or in other activities, it is necessary to adopt the method of linking the leading group with the masses, in addition to that of linking the general call with particular guidance. And that's section 3. I think that one was fairly straightforward. Again, the idea is that the masses alone are going to engage in spontaneous and maybe directionless activity, or at least there won't be necessarily a master plan to it. You know, we saw in 2020, for example, lots of spontaneous protests erupting all over the United States, but because there wasn't great leadership closely working with and embedded in those movements, or at least not enough. I'm not trying to diminish people whose orgs were actually out there at protests, giving speeches, trying to educate people, working in the communities. That definitely was happening. It's just not at this point, you know, at a national scale or even really a regional scale, maybe not even a statewide scale, that is really consistent, I guess you could say ideologically impenetrable, or at least, you know, with a really strong ideological foundation to it, and, you know, out there winning the trust of the masses, earning the right to give leadership to the movements. You know, people are out there revolting spontaneously, throwing shit at buildings, whatever they're doing, and they're mad. They want liberation. Well, it's to those of us who have studied the history, the theory, that, you know, we say, hey, you want XYZ, right? And they say, yeah, we do. Say, okay, we've studied this. Here's how you do it. Try this. And, you know, working closely with them, earning that trust, this is how you actually build a party and a movement that goes beyond just the spontaneity of, you know, I don't like this, let's meme about it. You know, that kind of agitation is important. However, it's got to be working towards something. So Mao is talking here particularly about the three strata of the masses, that you have some people who are more alert, more active, more capable, and the communist leadership needs to work with them, basically kind of deputizing and training them as much as possible. And then they go out and they talk to the intermediate people and then at least win over the backward so that the backward people aren't, actively resisting whatever kind of campaign you're trying to run at that particular time. This is really key because the party is small. The leading group is small. You just can't be everywhere at once. So you work with the population and you do so intelligently. Take the most active people, get them to do some of the work, have them talk to the intermediately involved people, and have them, win over the backward people. That way you can kind of get everything going in the same general direction. And then, of course, the point about, those who are in the most active, who are really showing initiative and really show themselves to be capable, promote them. Make sure everybody understands this whole thing is going somewhere and it is really the people's movement. The communists are just there to try to help it keep a useful shape. Finally, on this last point of linking a general call with particular guidance, I think that's fairly straightforward, also mentioned in point 2. But I think an example of this maybe is when organizations or people, I think organizations do it less because people who are organizers, understand some of what's involved with issuing a general call. But like a call for example, a general strike. This is meaningless. People don't know how to do it. You can't just say, let's do a general strike. People are like, okay, well, where's the support for that? And how are we coordinating? Who's going to get it into the media, etc.? How are we going to publicize it? How are we going to make its effects known? There's none of that particular follow-up. Now, obviously, in this case, what the Communist Party of China was doing at the time was a lot more radical. They were involved in armed struggle and were involved with the people's lives in many different ways. So as far as, what would be a general call that needed particular guidance as a follow-up, could be any range of things, but just to give an example which may have some resonance, there you go. All right, let's go on to section 4. In all the practical work of our party, all correct leadership is necessarily, quote, from the masses to the masses. This means take the ideas of the masses, which are scattered and unsystematic ideas, and concentrate them. Through study, turn them into concentrated and systematic ideas. Then go back to the masses and propagate and explain these ideas until the masses embrace them as their own, hold fast to them, and translate them into action, and test the correctness of these ideas in such action. Then, once again, concentrate ideas from the masses, and once again, go back to the masses so that the ideas are persevered in and carried through, and so on, over and over again, in an endless spiral, with the ideas becoming more correct, more vital, and richer each time. Such is the Marxist theory of knowledge. So that's point 4. So this is pretty straightforward also. From the masses to the masses. What's the party doing? Basically helping the masses to improve their own ideas. The masses in their lives face exploitation and have problems, and they come up with particular ideas about what are the most pressing problems that they want to be dealt with and what do they think they should do to deal with them. The party listens to that. The party goes back, studies them, concentrates them, turns them into a systematic approach that the party thinks will be most effective. Then go back to the masses and say, okay, here's what we came up with about your problem. Good idea on this. You can probably accomplish all your goals by doing X, Y, Z. Now let's go out and test it in the real world. Let's apply these. And then you see what worked, what didn't work. And then, as Mao says, in a spiral. So in other words, around and around, but not exactly the same each time. Expanding outward or upward, however you want to put it. It grows and grows through repeating cycles of this process. This is the kind of guidance and this is the process that the party uses to help the masses to arrive at things that are actually going to help them. So, on to point 5. The concept of a correct relationship between the leading group and the masses in an organization or in a struggle. The concept that correct ideas on the part of the leadership can only be from the masses to the masses, and the concept that the general call must be combined with particular guidance when the leadership's ideas are being put into practice. These concepts must be propagated everywhere during the present rectification movement in order to correct the mistaken viewpoints among our cadres on these questions. Many comrades do not see the importance of, or are not good at, drawing together the activists to form a nucleus of leadership, and they do not see the importance of, or are not good at, linking this nucleus of leadership closely with the masses, and so their leadership becomes bureaucratic and divorced from the masses. Many comrades do not see the importance of, or are not good at, summing up the experience of mass struggles, but fancying themselves clever, are still fond of voicing their subjectivist ideas, and so their ideas become empty and impractical. Many comrades rest content with making a general call with regard to a task, and do not see the importance of, or are not good at, following it up immediately with particular and concrete guidance, and so their call remains on their lips, or on paper, or in the conference room, and their leadership becomes bureaucratic. In the present rectification movement, we must correct these defects and learn to use the methods of combining the leadership with the masses and the general with the particular in our study, in the checkup on work, and in the examination of cadres' histories, and we must also apply these methods in all our future work. So that's point 5. So let me make another example on this whole making a general call and needing to follow it up with particular and concrete guidance. So let's say you're in a workplace. Have you ever gotten a direction from a manager or a coworker or whatever? Maybe you were new somewhere and you didn't really know what was going on in the workplace yet. And they just gave you some general instruction like, hey, you, go do X, Y, Z. And then they just kind of walk away. Well, you have no idea how to do that particular thing. Or you don't know what they're asking for exactly. This is where the particular and concrete guidance comes in. If you want somebody to clean the equipment room, for example, it's not enough to be that general. You got to say, all right, here's what we're looking for. Do this with the floor, and then, use this cleaner on this piece, and, then when you're done, put the rags over here. Okay, now you actually have the particular and concrete guidance. The people you've just called to do something know what they're doing, and you've actually ensured success a little bit more by giving that instructional follow-through. People feel supported in the process, that they can do the task to completion with success. There's a measurable set of criteria at the end, and overall, the experience from that particular call, whatever it was, can be evaluated later on. Mao's earlier example up in point 2 was in the rectification process. So just saying, hey, we're going to update the ideology. Not really enough. We got to actually follow this through into the particulars. What does it mean in practice? How is it to be done? Not to micromanage or try to foresee every single thing, but at least to get into the nitty-gritty enough that this is more than just a plan on paper. Let's move on to point 6. Take the ideas of the masses and concentrate them, then go to the masses. Persevere in the ideas and carry them through, so as to form correct ideas of leadership, such as the basic method of leadership. I'm going to read that again. Take the ideas of the masses and concentrate them, then go to the masses. Persevere in the ideas and carry them through, so as to form correct ideas of leadership, such as the basic method of leadership. In the process of concentrating ideas and persevering in them, and persevering means in this context keeping it up and following through, it is necessary to use the method of combining the general call with particular guidance, and this is a component part of the basic method. Formulate general ideas, or general calls, out of the particular guidance given in a number of cases, and put them to the test in many different units, not only doing so yourself, but by telling others to do the same. Then concentrate the new experience, sum it up, and draw new directives for the guidance of the masses generally. Comrades should do this in the present rectification movement, and also in every other kind of work. Better leadership comes with greater skill in doing this. Point 7. In relaying to subordinate units any task, whether it concerns the Revolutionary War, production or education, the rectification movement, checkup on work, or the examination of cadres' histories, propaganda work, organizational work, or anti-espionage or other work. A higher organization and its departments should, in all cases, go through the leader of the lower organization concerned, so that they may assume responsibility. In this way, both division of labor and unified centralized leadership are achieved. A department at a higher level should not go solely to its counterpart at the lower level. For instance, a higher department concerned with organization, propaganda, or anti-espionage should not go solely to the corresponding department at the lower level, leaving the person in overall charge of the lower organization, such as the secretary, the chairman, the director, or the school principal, in ignorance or without responsibility. Both the person in overall charge and the person with the specific responsibility should be informed and given responsibility. This centralized method, combining division of labor with unified leadership, makes it possible, through the person with overall responsibility, to mobilize a large number of cadres, on occasion even an organization's entire personnel, to carry out a particular task, and thus to overcome shortages of cadres in individual departments, and turn a good number of people into active cadres for the work in hand. This, too, is a way of combining the leadership with the masses. Take, for instance, the examining of cadres' histories. If the job is done in isolation, if it is done only by the few people in the organization department in charge of such work, it certainly cannot be done well. But if it is done through the administrative head of a particular organization or school, who mobilizes many or even all of his staff, or many or even all of his students, to take part in the work, while at the same time the leading members of the organization department at the higher level give correct guidance, applying the principle of linking the leadership with the masses, then undoubtedly the task of examining the cadres' histories will be satisfactorily accomplished. So that's the end of section 7. I think that mainly the one sentence, both the person in overall charge and the person with specific responsibility should be informed and given responsibility, is probably the key sentence in that passage. Basically, Mao's saying that, look, if you're in an upper position of authority and you need something done from somebody who is in a particular lower level organization, don't just tell the person who is going to actually do the thing, tell their superior as well, the person who's in charge of the organization in which the person who's going to do the thing is a part, so that they can, in the process of managing the overall lower organization, make sure that that person is carrying the thing out, which needs to be done efficiently and in coordination with all the other work that that lower organization is trying to get done. Otherwise, you might actually be messing up that lower organization's work by giving that particular person some orders which actually conflict with their organization's orders, and then the administrator will have no idea why this person who they want to do something is doing something else, and it's because you told them that and you're from outside their lower level organization. Whereas if you keep that overseer of the lower level organization in the loop, when it comes time to account for this task and maybe check up on it and see the success and evaluate it, it'll be that much easier to do so. All right, on to point 8. In any given place, there cannot be a number of central tasks at the same time. At any one time, there can be only one central task, supplanted by other tasks of a second or third order of importance. Consequently, the person with overall responsibility in the locality must take into account the history and circumstances of the struggle there, and put the different tasks in their proper order. They should not act upon each instruction as it comes from the higher organization without any planning of their own, and thereby create a multitude of central tasks and a state of confusion and disorder. Nor should a higher organization simultaneously assign many tasks to a lower organization without indicating their relative importance and urgency, or without specifying which is central, for that will lead to confusion in the steps to be taken by the lower organizations in their work, and thus no definite results will be achieved. Comment, in other words, prioritize. It is part of the art of leadership to take the whole situation into account and plan accordingly in the light of the historical conditions and existing circumstances of each locality, decide correctly on the center of gravity and the sequence of the work for each period, steadfastly carry through the decision, and make sure that definite results are achieved. This is also a problem of method of leadership, and care must be taken to solve it when applying the principles of combining the leadership with the masses and the general with the particular. So that's point 8, and it's definitely closely related to the theme of point 7. Basically, you want your organization working in harmony, not, too many things at the same time, or not knowing what the priorities were, which are the central tasks, which are peripheral, which is a confusing condition, as Mao says, which can be caused by a number of wrong actions. So on to point 9, the final point. Details concerning methods of leadership are not dealt with here. It is hoped that comrades in all localities will themselves do some hard thinking and give full play to their own creativeness on the basis of the principles here set forth. The harder the struggle, the greater the need for communists to link their leadership closely with the demands of the vast masses and to combine general calls closely with particular guidance, so as to smash the subjectivist and bureaucratic methods of leadership completely. All the leading comrades of our party must at all times counterpose scientific, Marxist methods of leadership to subjectivist, bureaucratic methods of leadership, and use the former to overcome the latter. Subjectivists and bureaucrats do not understand the principles of combining the leadership with the masses and the general with the particular. They greatly impede the development of the work of the party. To combat subjectivist and bureaucratic methods of leadership, we must promote scientific, Marxist methods of leadership, both extensively and intensively. So that's the end of point 9 and the audiobook. I think that this is also pretty straightforward. Mao is saying that, I've just given you a bunch of principles here, but it's really up to you and your creativity in terms of how you're going to implement them. Hold to the general logic of this, hold to the general principles, but how you actually talk to people, the style, how you present it specifically, that is up to you. And think about it, what works and what doesn't work. What methods keep you closer to these principles? What methods are leading you away from these principles? Because in the end, it is about communication, talking to people, winning them over, gaining trust, gaining respect. It's like trying to interview somebody. You can just sit there and technically interview somebody. I mean, it is a quote-unquote interview. If you sit there and ask somebody questions, just reading off a sheet with a blank expression on your face and, kind of deadpan vocal tone, you're going to get a certain set of answers that way. But if you talk to the person in a style which actually gets them to open up, and what gets different people to open up is different from person to person. This is where, again, that creativity, kind of reading the situation, comes in. Well, then you can get different answers. You can get people to warm up. You can get people to trust you a little bit more. You can get more of a back and forth going. And overall, you can get a richer and more involving experience from that. So Marx makes clear that those particular questions of method and how to do that are outside the scope of this particular document. He's explicitly stating that he's leaving it up to the individual to, here are the principles, you figure out how do you best hold to those. And, that in itself is a kind of leadership method. Mao is saying, I have explained these things to you, I've laid out the principles and the logic, and I trust you enough that you're creative enough, you're intelligent enough to go figure out how to implement these things, because ultimately, things aren't all orders and directives. People aren't just machines executing code. And when leaders give guidance that respects people's intelligence and respects people's creative abilities while still setting a clear set of parameters to work within, that can build trust and respect between leaders and the led. And in a way, it's exactly what Mao is talking about in terms of, from the masses to the masses, training people from the more active segment of the masses to be promoted and so forth, having that back and forth relationship, respecting the masses for their ideas, while also providing the guidance that everyone needs to make the most out of our potential. So anyway, I'll leave it there for now. What do you think about all this? I think that this was a very interesting little document. Leave your questions and comments in the comments area below, and we'll continue the discussion there as always. I look forward to reading those comments, as it's usually an interesting time. Otherwise, thanks for listening, and thanks to the current patrons whose names are on the screen. If you'd like to get your name on the screen, head to patreon.com/socialismforall. You can sign up for as little as $2 a month or more, whatever you see fit. Every donation is encouraging. They're also materially helpful, so I really appreciate all the patrons, past and present, for your contributions. You have really helped to make this channel possible and have helped to make this channel as active as it is, and I hope that it just continues to grow with your support. Other ways of helping out the channel to grow include liking, subscribing, leaving a comment, even if it's just thanks or good video, and sharing it on social media. All of these help to boost the channel in the YouTube algorithm, and it helps to bring in new people to the audience, expanding this discussion about ending capitalism through building a movement of informed, class-conscious, and organized working people. So that last point, organization, is key. Back in the real world, join an organization. Try to find something in your area that is active, healthy, in other words, not dysfunctional. People are burned out and pissed off at each other. That's really draining, actually, getting involved with something like that. And that is doing the kind of work that you'd like to see more of in your area. Within certain limits, for example, stay away from the Democratic Party. Don't be shy about joining some organizations that may not have exactly your politics. As long as they let you fight for Marxist positions in there, then that is an organization where you may be able to get something done. And in fact, larger organizations like DSA, which in some areas are the only place where there is anything going on, yes, you're going to run into social democrats. You also can fight them and oftentimes win. So don't rule it out. You know, I tell people that gaining experience, particularly if you don't have organization experience, is kind of like the key thing. Get out there, see how an organization works, gain some experience. If you want to switch organizations later, or you want to start your own project later on, you're totally free to do that. But being part of a political group that uses some kind of a democratic process internally, this is a new experience for a lot of people, and just learning to exist in an environment like that, you know, again, good experience is better than perfection, especially early on. This doesn't mean compromising your principles. It means that you may not be able to find enough other people who know how to cooperate in a group to actually accomplish what you're looking to do right now, but get out there and do something. Don't let it be an excuse to hold you back. You can't find enough people with your exact set of politics. Get out there, know what you stand for, represent it in your organization, and do everything that you can. As time goes on, you will meet more people, you will network. The movement is actively growing every day. So at some point, maybe next year, maybe 3 years from now, you will be in that position to have a split and your organization is actually big and, you know, actually leading the people in your community. All right, food for thought. That's enough out of me for now. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next video.